tried to say for, I don't know, nearly 40 years that we have to put...
At 11 minutes past 8 on a gray December morning, King Charles appeared before cameras with an expression that stopped the world cold. His hands trembled as he gripped the edges of the lectern, his voice breaking before he even spoke the first sentence. What followed in the next 4 minutes would bring his son, the future king, to tears in front of a watching nation. The king's shattering words. The broadcast was not scheduled. No advance notice had been given. No press briefing prepared the media for what was coming. At precisely 8:11, every major British network received an emergency signal from Buckingham Palace, the kind reserved for moments of national crisis. Within seconds, programming across the United Kingdom was interrupted. Screens went dark, then filled with the royal crest, and then silence. When King Charles appeared, the shock was immediate. He sat alone in a small room at Windsor Castle, the winter light filtering weakly through the windows behind him. His face was drawn, pale, older than anyone had seen him look before. He wore a dark suit, no decorations, no regalia, just the quiet simplicity of a man about to deliver unbearable news. He began speaking, but his voice wavered on the very first word. "My dear people," he said, pausing to steady himself. There was no script visible, no teleprompter. He was speaking directly, painfully, from a place far deeper than duty. "It is with the heaviest of hearts that I must share news I had hoped never to deliver." His hands, resting on the desk before him, shook visibly. The camera did not cut away. The world watched every tremor, every breath, every moment of a king unraveling in real time. After comprehensive medical consultation and with great sorrow, I must inform you that my health has deteriorated in ways that can no longer be managed privately. The treatments I have undergone have not succeeded as we had hoped. And the time has come to be honest, not only with myself, but with all of you. The words hung in the air like iron. Across Britain, people froze. In living rooms, kitchens, offices, and cars, the nation collectively held its breath. This was not a routine health update. This was something far graver. Charles continued, his voice cracking. "I have been advised that my ability to fulfill the duties of the crown will be significantly limited in the coming months, and while I intend to serve for as long as I am able, I must now prepare, as must this country, for a transition that I had prayed would not come so soon." The camera briefly shifted, and there, standing just outside the frame in the doorway of the room, was Prince William. His face was stricken, his eyes red. He was not supposed to be visible, but the broadcast had captured him anyway, a son watching his father break, unable to do anything but bear witness. Charles looked directly into the camera, his composure fracturing completely. "To my family, to my son William, I am deeply sorry. This is not the inheritance I wish to leave you. This is not the timeline any of us imagined." And then, for just a moment, Charles's voice failed entirely. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. The broadcast did not cut away. It simply held, capturing a king in his most human, most vulnerable moment. When he finally looked up again, tears glistened on his face. "The United Kingdom, the Commonwealth, and this ancient institution will endure. But my time as your sovereign is no longer a matter of distant future. It is a matter of present reality." The screen faded to black. The broadcast ended, and across the world the enormity of what had just occurred began to settle. King Charles had not abdicated. He had not stepped down. But he had done something perhaps even more devastating. He had announced the beginning of the end, the 48 hours that changed everything. To understand the devastation of that December morning, we must return to the 48 hours that preceded it. Hours filled with medical consultations, family anguish, and a realization so crushing that it forced a king to speak words he had spent his entire life hoping he would never have to say. It began on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 days before the broadcast. King Charles had been scheduled for what palace officials described as a routine follow-up appointment at the London clinic. The visit had been on his private calendar for weeks, tucked quietly between other engagements, shielded from public view. But those closest to the king knew there was nothing routine about it. Charles had been undergoing treatment since early autumn, a fact the palace had acknowledged only in the vaguest terms. The official statement spoke of ongoing monitoring and manageable concerns, language carefully chosen to reassure without revealing. But behind those words lay a far more troubling reality. The treatments, aggressive and exhausting, had not produced the results his medical team had hoped for. That Tuesday, Charles arrived at the clinic through a private entrance, accompanied only by his closest aide and a security detail sworn to absolute discretion. He was met by a team of specialists who had been treating him for months, doctors who knew his case intimately and who had grown increasingly concerned by what recent tests had revealed. The consultation lasted nearly 3 hours. Charles sat quietly as the lead oncologist walked him through the findings. The scans showed progression. The blood work indicated resistance. The treatments that had initially seemed promising were no longer effective. And while the disease was not immediately terminal, its trajectory had shifted in a direction that could no longer be ignored or downplayed. Charles asked the questions any patient would ask. How much time? What options remained? Could anything reverse the course? The answers, delivered with clinical compassion, were devastating in their honesty. Months, perhaps a year, possibly more if experimental treatments proved effective. But certainty was impossible, and the energy required to fulfill the duties of a reigning monarch was no longer something his body could reliably provide. When the consultation ended, Charles sat alone in the private room for nearly 20 minutes. He stared out the window at the gray London sky, processing what he had just been told. This was not the reign he had imagined. He had waited 7 decades to become king, and now, barely 2 years into his sovereignty, his time was being measured not in reigns or eras, but in months. That evening, Charles returned to Windsor Castle. He did not speak to staff. He did not take calls. He simply retreated into his private study, the same room where his mother had spent countless hours managing the weight of her own crown. He sat at her desk, surrounded by her photographs, her books, her presents, and he wept. The following morning, Wednesday, Charles requested an emergency meeting with his closest advisors. The group was small: his private secretary, his chief medical officer, and 2 constitutional experts who understood the implications of what was about to be discussed. The meeting took place in the audience room, a space typically reserved for state business, but today it felt more like a confessional. Charles outlined what the doctors had told him. He explained the limitations he would soon face, and then he asked the question that had kept him awake through the night. What does the Constitution require of a king who can no longer fully serve? The answer was complicated. Technically, Charles could remain monarch even if incapacitated, with a regency established to handle daily functions. But a regency carried its own complications, creating a dual structure of authority that could confuse governance and weaken the crown's symbolic power. Alternatively, Charles could abdicate, passing the throne directly to William. But abdication, historically tied to scandal and failure, carried a stigma Charles desperately wanted to avoid. There was a third option, one his advisors presented with great caution. Charles could remain king, but publicly acknowledge his condition and begin a gradual transition of responsibilities to William. It would not be abdication, nor would it be a regency. It would be something unprecedented, a living handover, a father preparing his son in full view of the world. Charles listened, asked questions, and then made a decision that stunned even his most trusted aides. "I will tell them myself," he said. "I will not hide behind statements or spokespeople. If my reign is ending, the people deserve to hear it from me." The advisors exchanged glances. A public announcement of this nature was extraordinarily risky. It would trigger constitutional questions, media speculation, and public anxiety. But Charles was resolute. He had spent his life advocating for transparency, for honesty, for breaking the royal habit of silence. He would not abandon those principles now, in his most vulnerable moment. By Wednesday evening, the decision was made. The broadcast would occur Thursday morning. Senior royals would be informed immediately. William, already burdened by Catherine's condition, would be told that night. Charles requested the meeting take place in the Oak Room at Windsor, a smaller, more intimate space. He wanted privacy for what he knew would be one of the most painful conversations of his life. Staff were instructed to ensure complete confidentiality. No leaks, no whispers. Just a father and son, facing a reality neither of them was prepared to accept. That Wednesday night, as the rest of Britain slept unaware, King Charles sat alone once more, rehearsing the words he would say to William. He knew his son was already carrying an unbearable weight. Catherine's illness had left William emotionally raw, stretched impossibly thin between duty and devotion. And now, Charles was about to add another burden, one that would reshape William's entire future. Charles wrote notes, crossed them out, rewrote them. He wanted to explain not just the medical facts, but the deeper truth, that he was proud of William, that he trusted him, that the crown would be safe in his hands. But every version felt inadequate, every sentence too formal or too emotional. By midnight, he gave up on preparation. Some conversations, he realized, could not be scripted. They could only be endured. At 7 o'clock Thursday morning, just over an hour before the broadcast, Charles's private secretary sent encrypted messages to senior members of the royal family. Princess Anne, Queen Camilla, even, hesitantly, Prince Harry in California. The message was brief. The king will address the nation at 8:15. You must watch. No explanation was offered, but the tone made the severity unmistakable. Those who received the message felt a cold, creeping dread. Something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. And in a quiet corridor at Windsor Castle, Prince William prepared to hear the words that would shatter the fragile composure he had fought so hard to maintain. The meeting William dreaded. The summons came at 6:45 on Thursday morning. William had been awake for hours, sitting in the dim light of his private study at Adelaide Cottage, staring at nothing in particular. Sleep had become a stranger to him in recent weeks, driven away by worry over Catherine, by the relentless pressure of royal duties, and by a gnawing sense that something else, something he couldn't yet name, was building in the shadows. When his phone vibrated with the encrypted message from Windsor Castle, his stomach dropped before he even read it. Your father requests your presence immediately. Private matter. Urgent. William dressed quickly, quietly, so as not to wake Catherine. She needed rest more than ever, and he had become expert at moving through their home like a ghost, present but unseen. He left a note on the kitchen table, gone to Windsor, back soon, knowing even as he wrote it that the words felt hollow. The drive to Windsor took 23 minutes. William made it in 18. The roads were still dark, empty, the world not yet awake. He entered the castle through a side entrance, avoiding the main gates where early shift staff might see him and begin asking questions. A single aide met him in the corridor, her face carefully neutral, but her eyes betraying something close to pity. Your father is waiting in the oak room, she said softly. William nodded, his throat tight. He had been in the oak room 1,000 times. It was a comfortable space filled with family history, photographs, and the kind of worn furniture that held decades of conversations. But today, walking toward it felt like approaching a sentencing. He found his father standing near the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the frost-covered grounds. Charles did not turn when William entered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Charles exhaled. Thank you for coming so quickly. William's voice came out rougher than he intended. What's happened? Charles turned slowly. The change in his appearance was startling. William had seen his father just 5 days earlier at a small family dinner, and while Charles had seemed tired, he had not looked like this. Now his face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed by something far heavier than ordinary exhaustion. Sit, please, Charles said, gesturing to one of the chairs near the fireplace. William remained standing. Just tell me. Charles's composure wavered. He crossed to the desk, picked up a folder, then set it down again without opening it. I received the results of my latest medical consultation on Tuesday, he began. The prognosis is not what we hoped. William felt the floor tilt beneath him. How bad? Charles met his son's gaze. Bad enough that I can no longer pretend otherwise. The treatments have failed. The disease is progressing. And while I am not dying tomorrow, the trajectory is clear. The words landed like blows. William's breath caught, his mind racing to process what he was hearing while simultaneously refusing to accept it. "You're saying—" "I'm saying," Charles interrupted gently, "that my time as king will be far shorter than any of us anticipated. I'm saying that the transition we always knew would come someday is no longer a distant inevitability. It is imminent." William sank into the chair, not because he chose to, but because his legs would no longer hold him. "No," he said, the word barely a whisper. "No, there has to be something else. Another treatment. Another option." "There are experimental protocols," Charles admitted, "but they offer no guarantees. And even in the best-case scenario, I will not have the strength to fulfill my duties as sovereign. The doctors have been clear. My capacity will decline steadily. I cannot ask the crown to wait while I deteriorate." William pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to hold back the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Catherine is barely holding on," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm barely holding on. And now you're telling me—" Charles moved closer, kneeling beside his son's chair, a gesture so unexpected that William looked up in shock. "I know," Charles said, his own voice thick with grief. "I know the weight you are already carrying. And I am sorry, William, I am so desperately sorry that I must add to it." Tears spilled down William's face, no longer containable. "This isn't fair," he choked out. "None of this is fair." "No," Charles agreed, his own eyes glistening. "It is not." For several minutes they sat together in silence, father and son, king and heir, two men facing a future neither of them wanted. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the first pale light of dawn began creeping across the horizon. Eventually, Charles spoke again. "I am going to address the nation this morning. I am going to tell them the truth. Not because I want to, but because they deserve honesty, and because you deserve not to inherit a crown under a cloud of secrecy." William wiped his face roughly. "What will you say? That my health has deteriorated, that my reign will be shorter than hoped, that the time has come to prepare for transition." Charles paused. "I will not abdicate, not formally, but I will begin transferring responsibilities to you gradually, publicly." William shook his head. "You're asking me to become king while you're still alive. I'm asking you to become what you were always meant to be," Charles said firmly, "just sooner than either of us wished." Before William could respond, the door opened quietly. Princess Anne stepped inside, followed by Queen Camilla. Both women looked as though they had been crying. Anne's jaw was set, her expression steely, but her eyes red. Camilla's face was pale, her usual composure visibly strained. Anne spoke first, her voice measured but tight. "William, your father asked us to be here, to support both of you through this." William stood, unsteady. "You knew?" "Since last night," Anne said, "and it has been the longest night of my life." Camilla moved to Charles's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "He wanted to tell you himself," she said softly to William. "He wanted you to hear it from him before the world does." William looked at his father, at the man who had waited 7 decades to wear the crown and who was now preparing to let it go before his story was finished. And in that moment, William understood the full weight of what was being asked of him. Not just to assume duties or fulfill responsibilities, but to grieve publicly, to lead while breaking, to become king while his father was still alive and his wife was still ill. "How do I do this?" William asked, his voice raw. "How do I carry all of this?" Charles stepped forward and placed both hands on his son's shoulders. "The same way I have carried it, the same way your grandmother carried it. One breath at a time, one duty at a time, and with the knowledge that you are not alone." Anne added quietly, "We will stand with you, William. All of us." Camilla nodded. "You are stronger than you know." But William did not feel strong. He felt shattered. He felt like a man drowning under the weight of impossible expectations, unbearable losses, and a future that had arrived decades too soon. At 7:50, Charles's private secretary entered the room. "Your Majesty, the broadcast is set for 8:15. We need to prepare." Charles nodded, then turned back to William. "I would like you to be there. Not on camera, but nearby. I need to know you are close." William hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be there." As they prepared to leave the Oak Room, Charles stopped and looked back at the space where he had just delivered the most painful news of his life. "This room has seen so much history," he murmured, "so many decisions, and now this." Anne touched his arm gently. "History will remember you as the king who chose honesty over pretense. That is no small legacy." Charles did not reply. He simply walked toward the broadcast room, his son beside him, both men moving toward a moment that would change the monarchy forever. And in that quiet corridor, as father and son prepared to face the world, William felt the tears return, knowing that in less than 30 minutes the nation would see them too. The hidden crisis behind palace walls. While the nation would soon focus entirely on King Charles's devastating announcement, the truth behind palace walls was far more complicated and infinitely more painful. What the public could not see, what no camera would capture, was the convergence of two catastrophic crises happening simultaneously within the same family. Charles's illness was not arriving in isolation. It was crashing into a household already fracturing under the weight of Catherine's condition, and the collision of these two tragedies was threatening to break Prince William entirely. For weeks, William had been living a double life. Publicly, he appeared composed, dutiful, the steady heir performing his responsibilities with characteristic professionalism. But privately, he was a man unraveling. Each morning he woke to the reality of Catherine's illness, a condition serious enough that doctors had advised complete rest and indefinite withdrawal from public life. He watched her struggle through treatments, witnessed her exhaustion, and carried the helplessness of knowing that no amount of royal privilege could cure what she was facing. Then, each day, he would leave her side, put on a suit, and smile for the cameras as though his world was not disintegrating. The palace staff had begun to notice the toll. William's private secretary observed that he rarely slept more than 3 or 4 hours a night. His protection officers reported that he often sat alone in his study until dawn, staring at nothing, unable to quiet his mind. During official engagements, he performed flawlessly, but the moment he stepped out of public view, the mask dropped. He would sit in the car afterward, silent and hollow-eyed, staring out the window as though searching for an escape that did not exist. One aide, who had worked with the royal family for over 2 decades, quietly told a colleague that she had never seen a member of the family look so utterly defeated. Catherine's condition had already forced William into an impossible position. He was a husband desperate to protect and support his wife, a father trying to shield his children from the fear and uncertainty saturating their home, and a future king required to maintain public confidence in the monarchy's stability. Each role demanded everything from him, and there was simply not enough of William to meet all those demands simultaneously. He was stretched so thin that those closest to him feared he was approaching a breaking point. And then, just as he seemed to be barely holding together, his father's diagnosis arrived like a second earthquake, shattering whatever fragile ground William had managed to stand on. The timing could not have been worse, or perhaps in the cruelest sense, it could not have been more inevitable. Charles had known about his worsening condition for weeks, but had delayed telling William, not out of secrecy or denial, but out of paternal protection. Charles understood that his son was already drowning. He had watched William navigate Catherine's illness with a strength that bordered on superhuman, and he could not bear to add another burden until absolutely necessary. But medical reality had forced his hand. The disease was progressing too quickly. The treatments were failing too conclusively, and the constitutional implications were too significant to delay any longer. So Charles had made the agonizing decision to tell William everything, knowing it would crush him, but knowing also that silence would be even more devastating in the long run. When William learned the full extent of his father's prognosis during that early Thursday morning meeting, something inside him fractured in a way it had not even during Catherine's darkest days. With Catherine, he could still hope. He could still believe in recovery, in medical breakthroughs, in the possibility that time and treatment might restore what illness had taken. But with Charles, the timeline was explicit. The doctors had been painfully clear. This was not a battle that could be won, only one that could be managed, prolonged, and eventually lost. And that certainty, that knowledge that his father's reign was ending before it had truly begun, brought William to a place of grief so deep that even he did not fully understand how to navigate it. Charles, for his part, was consumed by guilt. He had spent his entire life preparing to be king, and now that he finally wore the crown, his body was betraying him. But even worse than his own truncated reign was the knowledge of what he was doing to William. Charles understood that his son was already carrying an unbearable load, and now he was adding the weight of an early and unwanted succession. During their private conversation in the Oak Room, Charles had watched William's face crumble, had seen the tears his son could no longer contain, and had felt a guilt so profound it bordered on physical pain. This was not the inheritance he had wanted to give William. This was not the timeline any father would choose for his son. And yet here they were, trapped by biology and fate into a situation neither of them could control. The palace staff, meanwhile, had begun preparing for a transition they had never expected to manage during Charles's lifetime. Constitutional experts were quietly consulted about the mechanics of transferring power without formal abdication. Household administrators began reviewing protocols for a regency-style arrangement that had no modern precedent. Security teams assessed how to manage a situation where both the sitting monarch and the heir were simultaneously vulnerable, one through illness and the other through emotional and psychological strain. Every preparation was conducted with absolute discretion, but the sense of impending change saturated every corridor, every office, every whispered conversation behind closed doors. Princess Anne had taken on the role of stabilizing force, as she so often did during family crises. She understood that both Charles and William were too close to the situation, too emotionally devastated to think strategically. So she stepped in with her characteristic pragmatism, coordinating medical consultations, managing communication strategies, and ensuring that the constitutional machinery continued functioning even as the human beings at its center struggled to remain upright. Anne had always been the most unsentimental of the senior royals, but even she found herself overwhelmed by the dual tragedy unfolding within her family. In a rare moment of vulnerability, she confided to Camilla that she did not know how William would survive this, and that uncertainty terrified her more than she was willing to admit publicly. Camilla, too, was navigating her own complicated grief. She had spent years supporting Charles through his wait for the throne, celebrating with him when he finally became king, and now watching helplessly as his reign slipped away before it had barely begun. But beyond her sorrow for Charles, Camilla felt a deep, unexpected anguish for William. She had watched him grow into a man of extraordinary strength and compassion, had seen him build a family with Catherine, and had admired the way he balanced duty with genuine humanity. Now she was watching that same man being crushed under a weight no single person should have to bear. During the meeting in the Oak Room, Camilla had struggled to maintain her composure, knowing that any visible breakdown from her would only add to William's distress. But later, alone in her private quarters, she wept for the young man who was being asked to become king while his wife fought illness and his father prepared to die. And then there was Harry. Thousands of miles away in California, Prince Harry had received the encrypted message from the palace informing him of the impending broadcast. He had immediately tried to reach his father, calling repeatedly, only to be told that Charles was unavailable, preparing for the announcement. Harry had then attempted to contact William, hoping to offer support, to bridge the chasm that had grown between them over the years of conflict and estrangement. But William had not answered. Whether out of overwhelming emotional exhaustion or lingering resentment, William could not bring himself to engage with his brother in that moment. And so Harry sat alone, halfway across the world, watching the same broadcast as everyone else, learning about his father's condition, not through private conversation but through public declaration. The distance between them, both geographic and emotional, had never felt more absolute or more tragic. Back at Windsor Castle, as the minutes ticked toward the scheduled broadcast, William stood in the corridor outside the room where his father would deliver the announcement. He leaned against the wall, his head tilted back, eyes closed, trying to steady his breathing. Staff moved past him quietly, respectfully, pretending not to notice the tears streaming silently down the future king's face. He was supposed to be inside the room, standing just out of frame as his father had requested, offering silent support. But he could not move. He could not force himself to witness the moment when his father would tell the world that the reign they had celebrated just 2 years earlier was already ending. It was too much. It was all too much. Catherine's illness, his father's prognosis, the impossible future rushing toward him whether he was ready or not. William felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing he was about to fall but unable to step back from the precipice. And then, at 8:14, 1 minute before the broadcast was set to begin, Princess Anne appeared beside him. She said nothing. She simply stood there, her presence solid and unyielding, a reminder that he was not entirely alone even though it felt that way. William opened his eyes, looked at his aunt, and saw in her expression a reflection of his own devastation. Anne reached out and gripped his arm, not gently but firmly, the way one steadies someone about to collapse. She did not tell him it would be okay. She did not offer false comfort. She simply held him upright as the clock struck 8:15, and their world changed forever. The announcement that broke a nation. At 8:15 precisely, King Charles began speaking, and within seconds, the United Kingdom understood that something unprecedented was unfolding. His voice, normally steady and measured, wavered with barely controlled emotion. The words he spoke were simple, direct, devastatingly clear. He confirmed that his illness had progressed beyond what treatments could manage. He acknowledged that his ability to serve as sovereign would soon be compromised. And then, in a moment that shattered millions watching, he said the words no reigning British monarch had spoken in modern history. The time has come to prepare for transition. The constitutional implications crystallized instantly. Charles was not abdicating, but he was publicly acknowledging that his reign was ending. Political analysts scrambled to interpret what this meant legally, constitutionally, practically. Would there be a regency, a gradual transfer of power, an unprecedented living handover from father to son? But the legal questions faded against the raw human tragedy playing across screens worldwide. Charles's face, lined with grief and exhaustion, told a story no constitutional expert could analyze. This was a man confronting his own mortality while simultaneously preparing to pass a burden to his son decades earlier than planned. And then the camera briefly caught William, standing just beyond the doorway, and the nation collectively gasped. His face was streaked with tears. His composure, so carefully maintained through years of public duty, had completely collapsed. He was not the stoic future king in that moment. He was a son watching his father break, and he was breaking alongside him. Across Britain, people wept in their homes. Strangers embraced on London streets. In Parliament, politicians sat in stunned silence. From Edinburgh to Cardiff, church bells began tolling without any official instruction, a spontaneous mourning for a reign ending too soon. The monarchy had faced crises before, but never quite like this. Never so public, so raw, so utterly human. A family and a crown in crisis. The hours following the broadcast felt suspended in a terrible stillness. Inside Windsor Castle, Charles retreated to his private quarters, physically and emotionally spent. Camilla stayed beside him, offering silent comfort while he processed what he had just done. He had broken the monarchy's cardinal rule: never show vulnerability. And yet, he felt no regret, only exhaustion, and the heavy awareness that everything had irrevocably changed. William returned to Adelaide Cottage in a fog. Catherine was waiting, having watched the broadcast from their bedroom. She said nothing when he entered, simply opened her arms. He collapsed into her embrace, and they held each other, two people facing impossible futures, finding strength in the only place it still existed: each other. Princess Anne immediately began coordinating the constitutional response. Meetings were scheduled with the Prime Minister, the Privy Council, and Commonwealth representatives. The machinery of succession, dormant for 70 years under Elizabeth, was quietly activated once more. But this time, it moved not in response to death, but to a living transition no modern precedent could guide. Across the Atlantic, Harry booked the first available flight to London. Whatever tensions existed between him and his family, this transcended old wounds. His father was dying, his brother was drowning, and Harry, despite everything, needed to be there. The public response was overwhelming. Buckingham Palace received hundreds of thousands of messages within hours. Vigils formed spontaneously outside royal residences. The outpouring of support was genuine, profound, and heartbreaking. But beneath the sympathy lay uncertainty. What came next? How would the transition work? Could William lead while grieving both his father's decline and his wife's illness? The crown had endured wars, scandals, and revolutions. But this quiet, personal devastation felt different, more fragile, as though the institution itself might finally break under the weight of human sorrow. At 11 minutes past 8 on that gray December morning, King Charles did what kings are taught never to do. He showed the world his heart, broken and undefended. And in doing so, he changed the monarchy forever, not through strength or tradition, but through devastating honesty. William's tears, caught briefly on camera, revealed a truth the crown had long concealed, that royalty offers no protection from grief, no immunity from loss, no escape from the crushing weight of loving someone you are about to lose. The announcement was not an ending, it was a threshold, and on the other side waited for a future no one was ready to face.